Hey everybody, I'm Alexis. This is my husband Garrett. And today we're kind of continuing the series about things that we find annoying about the certain types. I just want to mention that we really love these types as a whole, and they can be healthy, and we love all the types when they're healthy. And then there are some types, everyone gets unhealthy sometimes, and so then there are things that really come out, and there are certain behaviors that people do when they're unhealthy. And so these are kind of some of those things. So I thought that the title, like Things That Are Annoying, is kind of a provocative title that's kind of clickable, but really it's just kind of a fun tongue-in-cheek way to say, like, these are just the growth points. Like, I love the quote, "We're all works of art and artists working ourselves." It kind of shows this paradox. Like, there are things that are great about us that we shouldn't change, and then there's some things that everyone needs to work on sometimes. So yeah, I want to talk about the things that we notice about this type. Before we get started, anything you want to talk about that you love about the ISFJs?
Yeah, I've got a few best friend ISFJs.
Yeah, he's an ISFJ magnet, actually.
That's true. I like them a lot. I think their loyalty is one of the biggest things I like. Like, if you have an ISFJ as a friend, I think they're really good friends. They stick to you as a friend. They tend to have a few really close friends, so I like that a lot about them.
Yeah. When I was thinking through, I have like a running list on my phone of like all the people that I'm pretty sure that I think are certain types. And when I was thinking of the ISFJs, I pictured them all with a smile in my head. And I think it's just, they're really good at like being encouraging and like smiling. And I think it's something that's I tend to underestimate the significance of that. And I also think that they're types that really get better and better with time. Like, the longer I've been friends with an ISFJ, I think the relationship has just gotten better and better. I think they learn me, they get more comfortable, they get more quirky. And so in my experience of ISFJs, they get better and better with time.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so yeah, with that being said, so now I guess we'll get into what's annoying about that.
Time to roast.
Time to roast, yeah. And we will do our own types also, and I'm going to try to be just as fair with our own types, so we're going to get in the middle of all of it too. So first, okay, so I've got this whiteboard on the screen. I want to get into some definitions, just very briefly. This is not super comprehensive, but briefly. So their first function is introverted sensing. And when you think introverted, you're thinking like turning inward, and then sensing are like your sensory experiences. So it's an inward processing of sensory experiences. And if you think of that more concisely, like what is that? That's pretty much a memory. So it's thinking about your memories, processing stories, processing memories. And because they have such a fondness for doing this, they tend to sometimes also love tradition and things of the past. Heirlooms, for example, not limited to, but things of that nature. And they really just understand that their life is like this storybook of experiences, and all the experiences really have formed them as a person. Their second function is extroverted feeling. If you're curious, spelled with A in this kind of like psychology type context, different than how we usually spell extrovert with an O. And it's the external feeling. So it's paying attention to how the group is feeling, managing those feelings. It could be feelings, emotions. How does the group think that things should be done? How do we feel about talking about politics? Do we all feel good about talking about politics, or do we not? And so things like that, kind of group norms, is what it can be a lot of the time. Their third function is introverted thinking. So it's their inward thinking. So they're thinking not about what, because they have that what the group feels, but then there's what do they think. And so it can be contrarian, it can be splitting hairs, finding distinctions. How are their thoughts distinct and different from what other people are thinking, and what makes sense to them? And then their final fourth function is extroverted intuition. And intuition are just the things that are not present right now. It's kind of the what could be, the possibilities. When you think extroverted, that's like externally. So maybe we could create something. It's a possibility, it's an idea. Maybe we could paint something. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we have this idea. And it's how can we bring ideas to life externally? Pretty much. So those are kind of in short, those functions. So when it pertains to how types are annoying, I've kind of found that a lot of times, especially if they're an acquaintance, I notice there's too much of that first function being used, and that second function doesn't have enough nuance. Once they get into, I know them a little bit better, then I'll start to notice, it's too much of that third function, or maybe not enough of that fourth function. So there are kind of some themes. So now I want to talk about like what some of those growth strategies are, and maybe some of the ways that they can be considered annoying. So why don't you start? Let's talk about introverted sensing first. What's something that you notice, kind of an introverted sensing annoyance?
One thing I've noticed, and these functions go together, SI and NE always go together, but I've noticed with that NE in the backseat, they do have big desires and dreams a lot of times. I hear a lot of ISFJs talk about their big dream or big like a book they want to write, or a shop they want to make, or something they haven't any desire, but the SI is scared of filling it out. So I think one thing I've noticed is SI can be fearful of the future, sort of, because it's so past oriented. And can be scared of risks, so they don't take that risk or action to fulfill their any desire. So that's one thing I've noticed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I have heard a lot of ISFJs express regret then later in life. Maybe some older ISFJs say, you know what, when I was in my 20s, I was wanting to do this, but, things were just never right, and I never quite did it, and they usually kind of smooth it over with the FE, because sometimes it's like they don't want to be a downer in the conversation, but you can tell that there's a little sting of regret there, that they wish that they would have taken the risk.
Yeah.
One thing, I've been noticing themes of things that I find kind of like annoying about the types, and ESTJs, it was kind of like work oriented, like kind of this work obsession. For ISFJs, it's not so much of, like in religious context, we call it like a sin of omission versus a sin of commission. So did you do something wrong because you committed the sin, or was it more like something that you should have done but you didn't do it? It's kind of like, are you too much or not enough? And with the ISFJs, I find that it's more of a sin of omission. It's not that they're not the type of person that's like foul-mouthed offending people all the time, annoying, but it's that they're so fading in the background, they're so wallflowery that that's almost the sin in and of itself. It's just they're not showing enough of themselves, and I don't want to sound rude, but then what happens is they can kind of come off boring because they're trying so hard to be palatable. They're so quiet that then I don't really know them. I don't know any of their controversial thoughts. I don't know their feelings about anything. They're just kind of smile and wave, go along to get along, and it can be kind of hard to get to know them. So I just kind of said, like, hard to get to know. And I think it's a combination of being an introvert, making you hard to get to know, and then also that secondary extroverted feeling that blends chameleons with the group pretty well. Do you have any other thoughts on SI?
That was it for SI.
I had another one. This was similar. I said a similar thing about the ESFJ because they have similar functions. But gender stereotypes. I have actually a couple. Some of my most sexist quotes that I've heard have been from ISFJ women. So one was, there was an ISFJ told me, she's like, and this was, the background of this was that we grew up in like a religious context that, Christian context can be known for being pretty sexist. And then if you're just like an ISFJ and you're young and you might just accept the belief as opposed to challenging it. So an example of that was, she's like, yeah, so men are the authority figure in the household. And so this pastor said something that was really good. So she's kind of like passing on this thing. And she's like, and he said was, men should make all the big decisions. So they'll pick where to live, what the jobs are going to be, and all the big decisions. And then the wife can pick all the smaller decisions. So like, what movie do you want? What flavor of popcorn seasoning do you want? And this is just... It's this passing down of tradition that needs to be thought through a little bit more. Like, not all tradition is good and should be passed down. And I think that's a particularly egregious example. I don't think that all ISFJs are saying stuff like that. But I do have a second example. This is from a different female ISFJ. And I expressed, at the time, what Garrett and I were thinking of doing, we were thinking of maybe I would work, and if we had kids, he would stay home with the kids, because he's like an ISFP, loves that, like, very sensory, like he wanted to be a preschool teacher for a while. I am always super work oriented. I've always been super career driven. So I was like, I think that'd be fun. And we both were down with it. We're like, that'd be great. And this ISFJ said to me, no, women are always better at home with kids and men are always better at work. You're going to be doing a disservice to your kids. That's going to be terrible. And I don't know. I thought that was just kind of like, maybe you could just like get to know us a little bit. We're both good with it. Maybe you could just stay out of it. And like, if we're enjoying it. So I think that can be an issue if you're taking tradition too far. Like, tradition is God, pretty much.
Yeah, there can be a tendency for SI DOMs, so ISTJ or ISFJs, to put too much value in tradition, and not enough stock in their smallest function. Take value in trying new possibilities, thinking through new ways of thinking, because the past isn't always right just because it's been done for a long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So finally, the other thing I wrote down that pertains to this function, and these get kind of blurry, like some of these I probably could have put in different boxes, but the last one was that new things are bad, like new, bad, tradition, good, until it's like 10 years later is what I found. Like there'll be some new technology, oh, it's terrible, until 10 years later things come around and you've gotten used to it, and then I was like, and then it's kind of like a flip. It's like, oh, I always liked that thing. You know, some people were against it, but I was always for it. And you're like, I was there. You were not always for it. And it's kind of it's kind of untruthful. It's like scared of the new thing till it's been around for 10 years. Then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, it's great. The crowd is in favor of it now, so I'm in favor of it now. Yeah, okay. That's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, that's good for SI.
Okay, sweet. Okay, extroverted feeling. I have the abbreviation there, FE, if you hear us saying some of these abbreviations, if you're someone new. What do you have to say about extroverted feeling?
One thing I put, this applies to probably any FE user, but you can get the vibe from them that they're always happy or doing good. So I noticed a lot of FE users won't talk about things that are bad. Like, I think you mentioned it, but they're like, oh, everything's great at home, everything's good. And FE wants to make a good atmosphere, but not everyone's always doing good. And so you get sort of a fake vibe from that FE if it's not balanced with TI, how you're actually doing.
Yeah. Yes, I think so. Yeah, one thing that I kind of wrote down an example was I knew one ISFJ, and she, we were like all playing a card game, and then her daughter started losing, and then so she's like, oh, you can just switch cards with me. And so her daughter would always win. And I just kind of, it's this fake happiness. It's not rooted in like fairness or truthfulness sometimes. It's like, it kind of plays dirty. It's like, we're going to make sure like people are going to be happy at any means necessary. Like, we're going to cheat, we're going to lie, people are going to be happy.
Yeah.
I don't know what to call it. Maybe I won't even write that down. The thing that I wrote down is sometimes they will take, I've seen multiple instances of this, is they will take on their significant other's beliefs. So I find a lot of times ISFJs will marry more dominant personalities. That's probably pretty much any personality is more dominant than an ISFJ personality. They're pretty like wallflower-ish sometimes. And they will take on their significant other's beliefs. I notice this more so with women than with men. ISFJs are one of those types that look very different, male and female, I've noticed, just because they take on so much tradition and, you know, gender, like tradition that's kind of been passed down, whereas other types don't. But so I've noticed that they'll, like, especially a female ISFJ will take on, like, just her husband's beliefs, and then in different rooms, they will say they have different beliefs. So, like, I've noticed this in politics before with multiple ISFJs. If when they're in this room, they're super liberal. When they're in this room, they're super conservative. And then when they're with their husband, they have their husband's beliefs. And it's just kind of this hopping around about TI things. You know, TI is very, like, sure of what it thinks about things. And so when you don't have enough of that, I don't know, it can cause some issues. I tend to notice, as, you know, a broad sweeping generalization, I notice that ISFJ males are really a lot in TI. And I noticed that ISFJ females are really in FE and really forsaking TI. So it creates some issues in both directions. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say about that one.
Yeah, I'll touch on my next one. It's, again, these are balanced. So mine was indecisive, don't have your own desires. So sort of what you were talking about. But there can be this chameleon likeness with FE if it's not balanced with TI, expressing your own desires, your own boundaries, your own thoughts. And so TI users are really good, I think, at expressing. They know exactly what they like, what they don't like. They know exactly what they believe inside. They've thought through a lot of things. And I think FE, like a ISFJ, can sometimes not think through what they believe, or at least not express what they believe. Maybe they know what they believe, but they aren't willing to create a line of, this is what I believe, even if you don't believe it. We can agree to disagree. That seems to be a hard line to come to.
Yeah. Okay, introverted thinking. Now, it's not super often that I get into arguments with ISFJs. I was thinking about this. It's not a very argumentative type at all. And I think pretty much all the arguments most of them are with the male ISFJs. So like I say, they're in TI a lot more in my experience. But for the female ones, I'm never really in arguments with them because they're just so much in FE, which that's one of those times where it's almost to their benefit to be encouraged societally to be in FE more. But I don't know what I want to call this. Straw man city, I think is what I want to call this. I'm very rarely in arguments with ISFJs. It just doesn't happen that much. But I could imagine if I was in like if I was married to an ISFJ, or if I was in a context where I was around them more. The times that I have been in arguments with ISFJs, it is straw man city. It is, they misunderstand me so much. And some of the ISFJ males I've been around are actually kind of arrogant about their beliefs. And I get the vibe that they think that, oh, other people are not as smart as them or something. And I'm like, well, you would think that if you have so many straw mans. Like, you just straw man their argument so much. Of course their argument seems dumb. So I think it can be very hard to be in arguments with ISFJs, in my experience. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does happen, it's rough.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things similar to the ESFJ where it's like your FE boundaries get pushed so much, and then once, you're 10 steps beyond what the boundary was, then finally the TI hammer comes down. And so it's like 98% of the time you get ISFJs that are super friendly, super unargumentative, to the part of, like we said earlier, it can be almost boring because they won't share distinct parts of themselves. And then just the complete opposite, like bringing the hammer down.
Yeah. I've noticed a difference between ESFJs and ISFJs in sort of ending relationships. Like, I've noticed unhealthy for both of those can end relationships suddenly, but ESFJs might do it with a big blow up, whereas ISFJs just sort of lurk away. So they just sort of cut off the relationship by not communicating anymore.
Yeah, I do notice that it seems with SFJs relationships can end unamicably. More so than with other types. But I do think the ISFJs are one of the types to have the most long-standing relationships.
Yeah, for sure.
On the whole, I would say. And as we talk about these things, it's important to remember, like, there's the healthy types, and there's a whole spectrum to unhealthy types. So I can think of some ISFJs that do none of these things. Right. I can think of certain ISFJs that do all these things. I can think of people that are not ISFJs that do some of these things. So it's, you have to take it all with a grain of salt. And so you find along the spectrum where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing to touch on here is just that the changing beliefs depending on who's in the room is a big thing. It's a example of not having enough TI, which I notice more so from the women. Okay, NE. What do you got for NE?
I don't have anything for NE.
Oh, nothing for NE. Okay, no. That's fine. Okay, I've touched on this a little bit. I mean, it's rude to say, and not all ISFJs seem like this, but they can be kind of boring seeming just because they don't share enough of themselves. And it's not that they intrinsically are boring, but it's just because there's like a wall up, so then they come off boring. Once I get to know the ISFJs, I don't find them to be boring. But as an acquaintance, I do a lot of the time because of this wall type thing.
Yeah, I think ISFJs have a lot of like that NE can be quirky, can be sort of creative, artsy. So I think ISFJs have that side, but don't let themselves express it as much as like a NE Dom or something.
Yeah.
But I think it's really cool when they do express. Like, I think healthy ISFJs are good at expressing all the hobbies they like, or themselves through their artistic endeavors.
Yeah, I do know a lot of really creative, like crafty ISFJs for sure.
Yeah.
Another thing is they can have so much SI, these are on like an axis, SI and NE, their first and fourth function. So I could have really put it in the first or fourth slot, but they're so routined. I get the vibe that it's like eat, sleep, work, eat, sleep, work, eat, sleep, work. That it's like, sometimes I wonder, I'm like, are you really living your life? Like, are you enjoying your life? Like, are you doing more than just like playing it safe? Like, it comes back to that first point that you mentioned about like taking risks, living your dreams. And I think ISFJs can be so safety conscious and really trying to meet the needs of everyone around them, but they don't live their life for themselves. I think it's a big thing. The other one, this is kind of a more tongue-in-cheek thing, but I noticed that they sometimes can live like kind of these boring lives, and then they will call themselves crazy. Like, they're like, we are so crazy. We are just a crazy family. We are so quirky. I hope no one sees what kind of family we are, because we are crazy. If only people knew how crazy we were. But meanwhile, they're like a pretty normal family, but crazy by their standards.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that that's pretty much that. I think the advice for pretty much all the types is to lean into their more extroverted functions. Um, and when it comes to the second function, extroverted feeling, a lot of ISFJs, especially if they're like over 30, are using extroverted feeling pretty well. Maybe more so like over 20 are using it, but just a matter of getting more nuance with it. So it's, creating, a true good feeling environment that's not artificial. I think it's really important.
Yeah, and I mean, back to that first point, non-risk takers. I can think of a few ISFJs I know, or I guess we both know, that have taken risks. Like, I think ISFJs are great business owners. Like, I can think of a few who
I can think of several
started their own
owners.
business and have been successful. And they've taken their any idea. They had a big idea that was scary, and but they didn't stop there. They actually did it, and they used their SI to actually complete it and take their any into the world. And so my encouragement would be to, if you have a dream that you're not acting on, to put some SI habits and routine into creating it. If it's starting a business, start studying how to do a business, start putting some steps forward. If it's writing a book, start creating habits of writing each day. Because SI can be really good at habits, so just set up habits to fulfill your any.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the points that he's touching on are really that fourth function. So, you got working on that second function and then your fourth function. The fourth function is really what gives you the risk, the creativity, the inventiveness, which are all inside of you. And I think when you lean on that function, you can say, okay, it might be scary, to take a risk, to do something new, but that fourth function is so creative and it works kind of quickly on the fly, and it will be there to serve you. And a lot of the every single ISFJ I think that I know is so responsible. And when I think of if anyone is prepared to take a risk, it's one of the ISJs, like an ISFJ or an ISTJ. And think about all these other people that are less responsible than you, and they've made it. And so if those people can make it, you can definitely make it. You set yourself up. You have this whole life of reliability. You can do something crazy for yourself.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all we have to say about the annoyances of ISFJs. I love ISFJs. My whole goal with this channel is I just want people to be the best version of themselves, the fullest version of themselves, so that they can, achieve their dreams. And sometimes it takes knowing what your strengths are. And I've got videos about, I've got a kind of a comprehensive ISFJ video, and it's got their unique gift to the world. And so you need to know your strengths and really, sell those. And then at the same time, you've got some weaknesses, and to the extent, especially in relationships, it's good to manage weaknesses. In a work setting, it's not as big of a deal, but it's important to do both. And I think that the series is kind of the home for the second part of those things.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much